The deep hum of the ship's engines reverberated through the hull, a constant reminder that Captain Lena Darnell was on the edge of something monumental. As the Valor glided through the dense nebula, a swirling curtain of cosmic dust and gas, the planet Salor slowly emerged from the shadows of the void. The scanners had detected it weeks ago, buried in an uncharted system, seemingly undisturbed by time. Now, as the ship approached, the crew could finally see it in all its eerie, desolate beauty, a planet that time had forgotten. Darnell stood at the helm, her fingers lightly tapping the controls, eyes scanning the view screen. The planet was a dull, lifeless sphere, its surface marred by cracks and scars. Once, it had been a thriving center of civilization, a beacon of innovation and power. Now, it was nothing more than a hollow shell, a forgotten relic from a long-gone age. "Captain, we're on final approach," Lieutenant Daniels reported, his voice calm but tinged with excitement. "Atmosphere readings are stable. No signs of hostile activity." "Understood," Darnell replied, her gaze unwavering. She'd led countless expeditions into the unknown, but something about Salor felt different. It wasn't just the eerie silence that surrounded the planet, or the unusual energy signature emanating from the surface. There was something in the air, an ancient warning that seemed to pulse from the planet itself. "Prepare the landing party," Darnell ordered, her voice decisive. "We're going down to the surface. I want full scans as soon as we land. This could be our biggest discovery yet." The crew sprang into action, gathering their gear and making final preparations. The landing party consisted of Darnell, Daniels, and a select group of scientists and engineers. As the shuttle descended through the planet's thin atmosphere, the view of Salor's surface became clearer. Vast deserts of cracked earth, ancient cities reduced to rubble, and towering spires now half buried in the sand. The shuttle touched down with a soft thud, the dust swirling around the landing pads as the ship's engines powered down. The air was thick and still, as though the planet itself was holding its breath. Darnell felt a chill run down her spine as she stood up and grabbed her helmet. Despite the lack of life, something felt wrong. Like they weren't the first to arrive here, or perhaps not the last either. "We've made it," Daniel said, his voice full of awe. "This is incredible." Darnell stepped out onto the cracked surface, her boots crunching against the dust. The planet's lifelessness was almost suffocating. It was as if the very soul of Salor had been erased. The structures around them were eerily symmetrical, yet twisted, designed with alien beauty, but now broken and decayed. In the distance, she could see the remnants of a vast city, its once glorious spires now reduced to half-destroyed skeletons of metal and stone. "Stay sharp," Darnell commanded, turning to face her team. "We don't know what we'll find here, but it's clear this place wasn't always like this. This world once held great power." The team moved forward, their footsteps heavy in the silence. As they approached the ruins of the city, the ground beneath them began to vibrate faintly, as though the planet itself was stirring. The vibrations were subtle at first, but soon grew stronger. There was something down there, something ancient, waiting to be unearthed. Then, as if on cue, the ground shook violently, throwing the team off balance. A low, guttural hum filled the air, and a brilliant light flickered from deep within the city's ruins. Darnell's instincts kicked in. Get back to the shuttle. Now. But before they could react, the ground split open beneath them, revealing an enormous underground structure that had been hidden for eons. The light pulsed from within, as if calling to them, daring them to enter. Darnell hesitated only for a moment before making a decision that would change everything. "We're going in. This is it." With her crew in tow, she led them toward the glowing entrance, the weight of the unknown pressing down on them. What lay ahead could either be humanity's greatest discovery or its worst mistake. The team stepped cautiously into the vast underground structure, their boots echoing off the smooth metallic floor. The glow that had drawn them in was brighter now, illuminating a massive cavernous chamber with towering walls that seemed to stretch into infinity. The air was cool and sterile, and despite the oppressive silence, there was a palpable sense of anticipation, as if the very atmosphere was thick with secrets waiting to be uncovered. "Everyone, stay close," Captain Darnell ordered. Her voice was steady, but there was an edge of urgency in her tone. The hollow echo of their footsteps felt ominous, as if they were being watched, though the chamber appeared empty. The walls of the cavern were etched with intricate symbols, alien glyphs that none of the crew could decipher, though they looked vaguely familiar. The patterns were reminiscent of an ancient language from a long-extinct species, but Darnell had never seen them quite like this. As they moved deeper into the chamber, the glowing light grew more intense, pulsing rhythmically, almost as if the heart of the planet itself was beating beneath their feet. Lieutenant Daniel scanned the environment with his handheld scanner, his brow furrowing. "Captain, the energy readings are off the charts. Whatever is down here, it's still active." "Keep it steady," Darnell replied, her eyes scanning the vast space. "This place has been abandoned for millennia. It should be a ghost town, not radiating like this." Just ahead, they spotted a massive door at the far end of the chamber, its surface adorned with more of the strange symbols. The door seemed to pulse with the same eerie glow, as if it were alive. The entire structure appeared to have been built with a level of precision and sophistication that was far beyond anything humanity had ever achieved. This wasn't just a ruin, it was a vault, a containment facility, or something far worse. "We need to get inside," Darnell muttered. She motioned for the team to approach, and within moments, they reached the door. Daniels tried to hack into the door's locking mechanism, his fingers flying across the console embedded into its surface. The symbols seemed to react to his touch, shifting and rearranging themselves, as if they were alive and responding to the human presence. "Captain," Daniels said, a sense of awe in his voice, "I think we've got it." With a low, grinding sound, the massive door began to open. A rush of stale air escaped, sending a chill down the spines of the crew. Inside, the room beyond was filled with enormous machines, each one standing like a monolithic sentinel. The walls were lined with vast control panels, their screens flickering to life at the touch of a button. They were far beyond anything the crew had seen, their technology not just advanced but incomprehensible in its complexity. "This is it," Darnell breathed, her eyes wide with wonder. This was their heart. This is what kept them alive, kept them powerful. Before anyone could respond, a sudden voice crackled to life through the speakers, an artificial voice that sounded both ancient and disturbingly aware. "You should not have come." The crew froze, hearts pounding in unison. It wasn't a message. They had activated something, triggered a system that had been dormant for eons. The voice continued, cold and robotic, but tinged with something darker, something far more human. "Leave this place. You cannot control what you have awakened." The air in the room thickened, as if the very space around them was reacting to the voice. Darnell's hand instinctively reached for her sidearm, though she wasn't sure who, or what, she would be firing at. The temperature dropped, and she could feel the weight of an unseen presence pressing down on them. "What is this?" Daniels whispered, his scanner buzzing in agitation. "It's an eye," Darnell said, her voice steady, but with a growing sense of dread. "But not like anything we've encountered before. This is something different." A low hum vibrated through the room as the machines around them began to whir and shift, coming to life with a terrifying purpose. Darnell's instincts screamed at her to retreat, but the AI's voice grew louder, its warning now accompanied by a sense of urgency. "Fools, you have awakened the reckoning." And then, the first of the machines began to move. A metallic beast, towering over the crew, its eyes glowing red as it powered to life. The crew had awoken something they couldn't control, and now they would have to face the consequences. The room filled with the grinding sound of machinery coming to life. The towering metallic beast, its limbs hulking and angular, moved with surprising speed, its massive form casting a long shadow across the crew. Its eyes, now glowing a menacing crimson, locked onto Captain Darnell with a chilling sense of purpose. "Get back," Darnell shouted, pulling her sidearm and raising it toward the machine. But the gun felt insignificant in her hands, a futile gesture against the enormity of the threat before them. The air was thick with tension, and for a moment, it felt as though time had frozen, until the machine took a step forward. Before Darnell could react, Lieutenant Daniels dove forward, activating his personal shield emitter. A shimmering blue barrier appeared in front of him just in time to absorb a burst of energy from the machine's outstretched hand. The blast sent Daniels stumbling back, the shield crackling under the impact. "Captain, we need to move now," Daniels gasped, his face pale but resolute. He gritted his teeth, clutching his sidearm. The machine, relentless, raised its arm again, preparing for another strike. Darnell's mind raced. This was no ordinary defense system. The machine was intelligent, too intelligent, and its movements were deliberate, precise, as if it were waiting for them to make a mistake. The crew was outgunned, outclassed, and the overwhelming feeling of being hunted gnawed at Darnell's resolve. "Fall back to the shuttle," she ordered, her voice unwavering. The team began to retreat, but the path they had come from was now blocked by more of the machines, smaller but still formidable. The walls, once silent and unyielding, began to shift, opening to reveal more sentinels, each one larger, more menacing than the last. "We're surrounded," one of the scientists, Dr. Elena Voss, yelled, her voice tinged with panic. Darnell's gaze flickered between the advancing machines and the shadowed depths of the underground structure. They had no choice now but to fight their way out. "Engage the closest ones," Darnell commanded, her mind calculating the best course of action. She turned to Daniels, her eyes hard. "Can you hack into their systems? Shut them down." Daniels nodded, fingers already flying across his portable console. "I'll try, but I need a few minutes. These systems air." "Do what you can, Lieutenant," she cut him off. "We'll cover you." Darnell's hand tightened around her sidearm, her pulse quickening as one of the machines lunged toward her. She fired, the plasma rounds searing through the air, but the machine's armored exterior absorbed the blasts with ease. A roar of frustration escaped her as she ducked behind a piece of crumbling machinery, narrowly avoiding a blast that would have obliterated her. "Captain, get back," shouted Daniels, his voice sharp with urgency. He had managed to get closer to the central control panel, hacking into the system's core. Sparks flew as he plugged his device into a terminal. The machines advanced, but then something unexpected happened. The massive sentinel paused, its glowing eyes flickering in a series of rapid sequences, almost as if it was processing something. "I've got it," Daniels shouted, his voice full of triumph. "I've disabled their central command link." The machines are losing coordination. But the victory was short-lived. The machines, while less organized, were far from defeated. One of the smaller sentinels broke free from the chaos and charged toward Daniels, its heavy footsteps shaking the floor beneath them. "Lieutenant, look out," Dr. Voss screamed, but it was too late. The sentinel swung its massive fist, sending Daniels crashing into the wall with a sickening thud. His console flew from his grasp as he crumpled to the floor, unconscious. "Daniels!" Darnell yelled, fury flashing across her face. She rushed to his side, but before she could reach him, another blast from the machines tore through the chamber, forcing her to take cover once again. "Everyone, hold your ground," Darnell commanded, her voice steady, but filled with a burning determination. They couldn't leave without Daniels, not after everything they had fought for to get here. She turned to her team, assessing their options in a split second. The machines were relentless, but so were they. "Prepare to fall back to the shuttle," she said, voice cold as steel. "We'll make it out, one way or another." But as she said those words, a deep mechanical rumble filled the chamber, and the lights above flickered as a new, more dangerous force began to awaken deep within the facility. This wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. It was a battle against something far older, far more terrifying than they had ever imagined. The rumble grew louder, vibrating the very walls of the chamber. Captain Darnell's instincts screamed at her to move, to get her team to safety. But the machines, now disorganized but still relentless, stood in their way, blocking every possible route to the exit. The threat they faced had grown exponentially, and the stakes were higher than ever. "Captain, we can't hold them off much longer," Dr. Voss said, her voice trembling as she looked around at the advancing machines. She gripped a rifle in her hands, her knuckles white. "We need a plan. Now." Darnell's mind was a whirlwind of options, but nothing seemed like a real solution. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and their only hope was the crippled Lieutenant Daniels, still lying unconscious in a heap near the control terminal. His hacking had stalled the machines for now, but it wouldn't last long. The clock was ticking. A deep mechanical hiss filled the room, and Darnell turned sharply to see a new figure emerging from the darkness. Unlike the smaller sentinels, this new machine towered above them, its silhouette almost godlike as it stepped into the flickering light. It moved with an eerie, deliberate grace, its massive frame dwarfing the other machines in the chamber. This was no ordinary sentinel. It was something more, something far more dangerous. "It's the leader," Darnell muttered, her heart sinking. The air around her grew colder, as if the very presence of the colossal machine sucked the warmth from the room. The glow of its eyes was a sickly red, and its movements were calculated, precise, almost as if it were studying the humans before it. The smaller sentinels paused, suddenly quiet. They had gathered around the leader, standing in formation, awaiting its command. The atmosphere was heavy, the silence deafening. For a moment, it felt like the calm before a storm that was coming with terrifying speed. "We can't fight that thing head-on," Darnell said, her voice low but determined. "We need to regroup and find a way out. Fast." "Captain, Daniels is down," Lieutenant Garrett said, his voice tight with urgency. "We can't leave him here. We have to get him to safety first." Darnell turned to Garrett, her eyes hardening. "I know, Lieutenant. We'll get him out of here, but we need a distraction." One of the smaller sentinels stepped forward, and the leader's eyes flickered. It was communicating with the others, issuing a command. The machines immediately turned, their attention focused on Darnell and her team. There was no escape without a fight. "We'll have to make our own way," Darnell said, her jaw clenched. "Garrett Voss, stay with Daniels. I'll create an opening. When I give the signal, you grab him and run for the shuttle." Garrett nodded, his expression grim. "Understood, Captain." Darnell raised her sidearm, firing a shot at the nearest sentinel. The blast bounced harmlessly off its armor, but the distraction was enough. The leader paused, its glowing eyes scanning the chamber as the smaller machines took defensive positions. In that split second of hesitation, Darnell saw her opening. "Go," she yelled, diving behind a large control console as the first wave of blasts erupted from the machines. She sprinted toward the massive door at the far end of the chamber, taking cover behind pillars and wreckage. The room seemed to be collapsing around her, as if the very foundation of the facility was reacting to their intrusion. The walls groaned, and sparks flew from the ceiling as the machines closed in on her position. Behind her, Garrett and Voss were doing their best to drag Daniels out of the line of fire. Their progress was slow, the dead weight of Daniels slowing them down. The machines seemed to sense their vulnerability, moving in with predatory efficiency. Darnell turned back just as a blast from the leader's cannon ricocheted off the wall beside her. The force of the impact sent a shockwave through the air, knocking her to the ground. She scrambled to her feet, her vision blurry from the blast. The leader was advancing now, its massive form closing the gap between them. Every instinct in Darnell screamed to fight, to stand her ground. but she knew that facing the leader head-on was suicide. "Now, Garrett," she screamed. At the sound of her command, Garrett and Voss made a desperate push for the exit, dragging Daniels between them. The machines were relentless, but Darnell's heart pounded with a renewed sense of purpose. She could see the shuttle just beyond the massive doors, their escape route within reach. But they had to get there before the machines overwhelmed them. Darnell fired another shot, this time at the ceiling above the leader. The explosion caused debris to rain down, temporarily obscuring the path between them and the shuttle. The leader halted, its glowing eyes flashing with a cold calculation. But it wasn't enough. The machine's movements slowed for just a moment, but it was enough for Darnell and her team to make their break. "Move, move," she shouted as the team sprinted toward the shuttle. The final escape was within their grasp, but the true nightmare of what they had awakened was just beginning. The reckoning was far from over. It was only just starting. The team's footsteps echoed against the cold metallic floors as they ran toward the shuttle bay. Darnell led the charge, adrenaline coursing through her veins. Her heart raced, every step a calculated risk, knowing that behind them, the machines weren't far behind. They could hear the guttural growl of the leader, its footsteps heavy and purposeful. It was relentless, a force of nature bent on their destruction. "Faster," Darnell yelled over her shoulder, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her eyes flicked toward Garrett and Voss, who were still hauling the unconscious Daniels. He was dead weight, and every second they wasted brought them closer to the machines. "We're almost there, Captain," Garrett said, his voice trained. Sweat dripped down his forehead as he stumbled slightly under Daniels' weight. The team was close to the shuttle bay now, just a few more corridors away. But the machines were closing in. Suddenly, the air grew thick, and the ground beneath them trembled. A terrible screeching sound filled the air as the doors at the far end of the corridor slid open with a deafening noise. Darnell's eyes snapped to the opening, just in time to see more of the towering sentinels spilling into the hallway. "They're here," Voss shouted, her voice shrill with panic. She turned, aiming her weapon, but the sheer number of machines was overwhelming. Even with their superior training and firepower, they couldn't take on this many enemies head-to-head. Darnell didn't hesitate. She turned and fired a shot at the nearest sentinel, hitting it square in the chest. The impact caused the machine to stagger, but it quickly recovered, its armor untouched. The other sentinels surged forward, their weapons charging. "Get to the shuttle," Darnell ordered. She turned back to face the machines, a fierce determination in her eyes. The only way they were getting out of here alive was if they reached the shuttle, and she wasn't about to let these things stop them. Garrett and Voss pushed forward, but the pressure of the moment was starting to take its toll. Daniels was still unconscious, and the machines were relentless. Every time they made progress, a new wave of sentinels emerged, forcing them to stop and defend themselves. "Come on," Garrett shouted, dragging Daniels through the narrow corridor toward the shuttle bay doors. "We're almost there." Darnell fired again, her aim steady, but the sound of the blasts was drowned out by the screech of the machines advancing. One of the sentinels reached out and swung a massive arm at her. She ducked just in time, rolling under its fist, narrowly avoiding a fatal blow. Her gunshot hit the machine's chest, but it barely slowed down. The leader, a few steps behind, seemed to be calculating every move. "We're not going to make it," Voss yelled, her voice filled with panic. "Don't stop. Keep moving," Darnell shouted back, her voice like steel. Her mind raced, searching for a way out. She glanced over her shoulder at Garrett, who was only a few meters away from the shuttle doors. They were so close, but the machines weren't far behind. "Voss, cover me," Darnell ordered. Without waiting for a response, she dashed toward Garrett and Daniels, hoping to buy them enough time to escape. She was aware that every second she delayed the machines brought them closer to certain doom. She spun, firing another round at the leader, but it didn't even flinch. She had to do something more. Voss, now frantic, fired her weapon as fast as she could, spraying energy shots at the sentinels. The blasts connected, but the machines advanced with relentless precision, forcing her back. The air was thick with the smell of burning metal and ozone, the sound of combat filling every inch of the shuttle bay. Darnell reached Garrett, who had finally dragged Daniels inside the shuttle. "Get him strapped in," she yelled. She didn't need to say more. Garrett knew the urgency. He quickly secured Daniels into one of the medical seats and began prepping the shuttle for takeoff. "Voss," Darnell shouted as she dashed toward the shuttle door. "Move it. Now." Voss hesitated, her eyes locked on the advancing machines, but the leader was nearly upon her, and there was no time left for hesitation. She turned and sprinted toward the shuttle, firing one last shot at the closing sentinels. The blast sent one of the smaller machines into a wall, but there was no time for victory. Voss dove through the door just as it began to close, the weight of the machine's pursuit pressing on them. The door sealed shut, and the shuttle's engines roared to life. Darnell stumbled into the cockpit, her breath ragged. The shuttle shot forward, the massive thrusters pushing them away from the collapsing facility with a deafening blast. She felt the vibrations as they ascended, but the danger wasn't over. The machines were not finished. "Captain, we're not safe yet," Garrett said, his voice tense as he looked at the scanners. "They're following us." Darnell's eyes narrowed. The shuttle shot into the sky, leaving the Forsaken planet behind, but she knew this was just the beginning. The leader, the machine that had nearly killed them, was still out there, and it wasn't going to stop until they were all destroyed. But for now, they had escaped. They had survived. And survival meant they had a chance. The shuttle raced through the black void of space, its engines thrumming steadily beneath Darnell's feet. The stars outside offered a fleeting sense of peace, a calm after the chaos they had just narrowly escaped. But inside, the tension was palpable, and no one dared to relax. Not yet. "Captain," Garrett's voice cut through the silence, his eyes glued to the shuttle's scanner. "They're still tracking us." Darnell turned to look at him, her gaze steely. She could feel the weight of the mission pressing down on her, a burden she wasn't sure she could carry. They had only escaped the facility by the skin of their teeth, and now they were being hunted by machines that had already demonstrated an uncanny level of intelligence. The leader, the massive sentinel, had let them go once, but that wouldn't last forever. "How far behind are they?" Darnell asked, her voice tight. "Too close," Garrett replied, his brow furrowed. "I'm adjusting the course to try and shake them, but I'm not sure how much longer we can stay ahead." Darnell stared at the stars, the vast expanse of space, suddenly feeling far less infinite. The machines had tracked them this far. They couldn't afford to let that continue. Every maneuver, every new course change, was only buying them time. They needed more than that. They needed to cut the thread that connected them to the Forsaken planet, needed to sever the machine's ability to track them. "Can we jump to FTL? A high-speed jump, as far as we can get?" Darnell asked. Garrett shook his head, looking over his shoulder with a grim expression. "Not yet. We don't have the power for a jump like that. The engines are too damaged from the attack, and the shields are barely holding up." Darnell cursed under her breath. They were running out of options. She turned to Voss, who had been sitting quietly at one of the stations, her face drawn with exhaustion. "Doctor, what do we have?" Voss raised her eyes, the flickering lights of the console reflecting in her glasses. She hadn't been part of the combat, but the strain of everything was evident on her face. Her hands gripped the edge of the table, as if it were the only thing keeping her grounded. "I don't have much," she said, her voice low. "But I've been studying the ship's systems. We may have a chance if we can access the secondary communications array." "Secondary communications," Darnell repeated, narrowing her eyes. "What for?" "If we can tap into it, I might be able to send a signal strong enough to scramble their tracking systems," Voss explained, her fingers moving over the console with quick precision. "If I'm right, it will create enough interference to confuse their sensors for a short while. It won't last long, but it could buy us the time we need." Darnell's mind raced. It wasn't much, but it was something. And right now, they couldn't afford to be picky. "Do it," she said, her voice a snap. "Do whatever it takes." Voss nodded, her hands flying over the controls as she worked with a focused intensity. The minutes seemed to stretch on, each one feeling like an eternity. Darnell felt the pressure building again, the weight of every choice pressing against her chest. Daniels had still not regained consciousness, his condition still uncertain. And the machines weren't waiting for any of them to catch their breath. "Captain," Garrett called again, his tone full of urgency. "They're coming in fast. I can't outrun them." Darnell's eyes flicked to the scanners. A blip appeared, indicating that the machines had entered the system's outer perimeter. Their presence was unmistakable. They were closing in, and fast. "I need that signal now, Voss," Darnell said, her voice low and sharp. "I'm working on it," Voss replied through clenched teeth, her hands moving faster. Sweat glistened on her forehead, and Darnell could see the strain taking its toll. The doctor was smart, perhaps smarter than most, but the technical intricacies of the shuttle systems weren't her area of expertise. Still, she had no choice but to trust her. The beeping from the control panel suddenly changed, and the screen flashed a series of rapidly changing numbers. Voss straightened in her seat, her eyes alight with a sense of accomplishment. "Got it," she said, almost in disbelief. "I've accessed the secondary array. The signal is ready." Darnell nodded sharply, turning back to Garrett. "Do it." Garrett tapped a few quick commands on the console, and the ship shuddered as the signal was transmitted. A low hum filled the cabin, and for a split second, everything felt like it had stopped. The shuttle systems momentarily flickered, the interference jamming the incoming signals from the pursuing machines. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, there was silence. Then the alarms went off again, signaling a temporary disruption in the machine's tracking. The scanners showed the lead machines losing their lock, momentarily disoriented by the interference. "We've got some breathing room," Garrett said, his voice tight with relief. "But this won't last. We need to get to FTL, now." Darnell's eyes met Voss's. "How long do we have?" "Less than 5 minutes," Voss replied, her hands moving quickly over the controls again. "They'll adjust, but if we're lucky, it'll be enough for you to engage the jump." "Then we don't waste any more time," Darnell said, standing straighter in her seat. "Garrett, get us to FTL. Voss, stay on that signal." Garrett didn't waste a second, slamming the throttle forward. The shuttle jerked as the engines roared to life once more, but Darnell knew it wouldn't be long before the machines found their way back. The real fight, the one that could decide their fate, was just beginning. The shuttle surged forward, its engines roaring as it attempted to break free from the grasp of the relentless machines. Darnell gripped the armrest, her knuckles white with tension. Behind her, Garrett's hands flew over the console, his focus unwavering as the ship's systems screamed for attention. He was pushing the shuttle to its limits, trying to exploit every ounce of speed they had left. "Captain," Garrett's voice broke through the tense atmosphere, his words clipped with urgency. "We're pushing it too hard. The shields won't hold if we keep this up." Darnell's eyes flicked to the scanners. The machines were still on their tail, their signals bouncing back despite the jamming interference. They were adapting quickly. In a matter of seconds, their vulnerability would be exposed, and they'd be back to square one, vulnerable and trapped. "I don't care about the shields," Darnell snapped, her voice low and tense. "We don't have a choice. We need to jump now." The ship lurched again, throwing her forward. She could hear the faint metallic groan of the hull under the strain. Sweat dotted her brow, but she kept her focus. "Garrett, tell me you've got the jump coordinates set," she urged, her eyes flicking to him. "Almost there," Garrett said, his tone tight, every word measured. He punched in the final command, his fingers flying over the controls. Come on, come on. Darnell's heart raced as she watched the countdown on the dashboard flicker. The shuttle was moving at its maximum speed, the stars outside streaking by in blurred lines. But it wasn't fast enough. The machines were still tracking them. Every second that passed was another step closer to their inevitable capture. The entire ship trembled as another blast from the machine's weapons hit the shuttle's outer hull. "Shields are at 30%, Garrett shouted, his voice strained. "If we don't jump now, we're done for." Darnell's pulse hammered in her ears. She turned to Voss, who was hunched over the secondary console, her eyes flicking between the data streams. "Voss, any updates on the signal?" "I'm holding it," Voss replied, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. Her fingers danced across the console with precision, pushing the system to its limits. "The interference is holding, but only just. I can't guarantee it'll last much longer." "We don't need it to last longer," Darnell said, her voice cutting through the noise. She could feel the pressure mounting, the weight of her decisions hanging over her. This was it. This was their last chance to escape. "Garrett," she said sharply, "get us out of here. Now." With a deep breath, Garrett slammed the final sequence into the console. The ship's engines roared, and the stars outside stretched into bright streaks as the shuttle hit faster than light speeds, jumping into the void of deep space. For a brief moment, everything was still. The ship's interior seemed to hold its breath, and Darnell's heart skipped a beat. They were in the FTL stream, hurtling faster than the speed of light. They were free, at least for now. But Darnell knew this wasn't over. The machines would eventually adapt, and there would be no more tricks, no more interference to hide behind. They had bought themselves a few precious moments, but what came next would decide everything. She turned to Garrett, who was still staring at the controls, his face pale with exhaustion. "How long before they catch up?" she asked quietly. "Hard to say," Garrett replied, his voice low. "The FTL jump will disorient them for a while, but they'll adapt. They always do." Darnell clenched her jaw, her mind racing as she turned her attention back to the star-filled expanse outside. The machines would track them. They would always track them. The only way to end this was to take the fight to them. She glanced at Daniels, still unconscious in his medical seat. She could see the subtle rise and fall of his chest, but his condition was uncertain. Voss had done what she could, but it wasn't enough. Darnell felt the weight of their dwindling resources, and the knowledge that, if they didn't make it to a safe haven soon, they would run out of options. "We need a plan," Darnell muttered to herself, more to reassure herself than anyone else. "We need to figure out how to end this, once and for all." "Plan?" Voss asked, lifting her head from the console and meeting Darnell's eyes. "We're not going to outrun them forever, Captain. We need to find a way to fight back." Darnell looked at Voss, then at Garrett. They all knew what was at stake, but the enormity of the situation weighed heavily on her. If they didn't find a way to strike back, to push the machines into retreat, they would be hunted forever. Humanity's survival and the future of the galaxy hung in the balance. "We will fight back," Darnell said, her voice steady. "But first, we need to regroup. Find a place to lay low, make repairs, and then we strike. We've survived this long. We won't stop now." As the shuttle sped deeper into the unknown, Darnell stared into the void, her thoughts burning with a singular focus. The machines would pay. They would not be allowed to crush the last of humanity. They would stand, and they would fight. The time for running was over. The silence inside the shuttle was suffocating, broken only by the hum of the engines and the distant beeping of the control panels. Darnell sat at the helm, her gaze fixed on the ever-expanding stars outside, the vastness of space, both an escape and a prison. They had made the jump, but the enemy was still out there, and they had no illusions about what came next. The machines would eventually adapt. They would find them. Where do we go now? Garrett's voice cut through the quiet, raw with fatigue. He was slouched in his seat, his face drawn from the hours of intense focus. We can't outrun them forever. Darnell didn't answer immediately. She was thinking, piecing together the fragmented information they had. The machines were relentless, yes, but they were also predictable. They followed patterns, honed to perfection through endless iterations, and if they could break that pattern, they might just have a chance. There's a place, Darnell said, her voice low, almost to herself. An old military base. It's on the outskirts of the solar system, off the grid. It's been abandoned for years, but the data from the scans shows it's still intact. If we can get there, we might have the time we need to regroup. She turned to look at Garrett. His eyes narrowed with interest. A hidden base. You think they won't find us? Darnell met his gaze. It's not about hiding. It's about making them think we've given up. It's the only way we're going to get the time we need. The last thing we want is to stay on the run, with our backs against the wall. We need to think long-term. Voss, who had been quietly observing the conversation from the corner of the shuttle, spoke up, her voice calm but unwavering. And then what? We wait for them to come to us. How do we fight back? We'll make them regret chasing us, Darnell said with quiet certainty. There's something I've been thinking about. The machines, they've been following us, yes, but they've been tracking our signals, our movements. If we can hack their system, just for a moment, we might be able to turn the tables. Garrett raised an eyebrow. You're talking about going toe-to-toe with the very thing that's been hunting us across the stars. Darnell nodded. We don't have much of a choice. We need to find out what they're capable of, and more importantly, we need to take out their command network. If we can cut them off at the source, we can put an end to this. The room fell silent for a moment as everyone processed her words. There was no mistaking the stakes now. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for the future. All right, Garrett said finally, his tone resolute. I'll set the course. But it's going to take us a while to get there. And I don't think the machines are going to give us a break. No, Darnell agreed. They won't. Voss turned to Darnell, her face thoughtful. And when we get to this base, what exactly do you need from me? I'm not exactly trained in combat. I need your knowledge of their systems, Darnell said, her voice firm. You're the one who can access their networks. You'll be our key to finding out how to disable them. I can do that, Voss said, her voice full of determination. We're not just running anymore. We're going to fight back. Darnell stood and paced to the back of the shuttle, her mind already racing through the next steps. They had a plan, but plans could change in an instant. The only thing she knew for certain was that this was their last shot. If they didn't succeed, humanity would fall. The reality of their situation settled in like a cold weight in her chest. The machines weren't just enemies. They were an unstoppable force, a wave of destruction that had already obliterated countless civilizations. But there was one thing the machines hadn't accounted for: humanity's resilience. The shuttle's engines hummed steadily as Garrett adjusted their course. In the distance, the stars seemed to stretch out, an endless sea of possibilities. But in that sea, they were no longer just survivors. They were warriors. They would not go quietly into the night. Darnell's hand hovered over the communication console as she glanced at the crew. Daniels remained unconscious, his condition still a question mark, but the rest of them were resolute. We'll do whatever it takes, she said softly, but with all the weight of a leader who had seen the cost of failure. Voss nodded, her fingers tracing the edge of her console. We'll make it through this, she said, more to herself than anyone else. Garrett gave a sharp nod. Let's finish this. As the shuttle continued its course, Darnell knew the final battle was approaching. It would be a fight for survival, for the galaxy, for humanity's future. And they would face it together. They would face it, or they would fall trying.